Hi, welcome to our next session of Roots to Leaves. We're looking at and talking about human nature. My name is Reverend Jude Geiger. I'm a minister serving Community Church in New York City, and I'm here with my colleague, Brother Zachary.
Hi, I'm Brother Zachary. I am currently serving the community church as the chaplain for pastoral care. I am a Franciscan friar and Catholic priest coming out of St. Joseph Mission Church in New Jersey. Really excited to talk about human nature, and it's really connected, I think, to our previous topic when we were talking about inherent worth and dignity.
We were just chatting earlier about that and likeness of God. Can you say from a Catholic perspective a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I was thinking about what we had discussed already, talking about original sin and the Catholic perspective of people being inherently sinful. Um, and that is true on the one hand, yet on the other, there is a theology that just it continues through Catholic history and doctrine of being made in the image of God and human beings actually having God's likeness. Now, this is not just about being being like God, but really, and Catholic doctrine looks to the Bible and to the Adam and Eve story for some of this scriptural grounding. But it really makes us special as people. Human nature, the idea that we are formed in the image of God as being an important aspect of our nature, um, that who we are is not just inherently sinful. There's also an election to humanity and to human beings. We are unique among creation in that we have the image of God, and um, that distinction is actually a mark of separation. It makes us more like God than the rest of creation.
And I'm in our Unitarian Universalist tradition. Those of us that are coming from in Abrahamic traditions like Christianity or Judaism or Islam, uh, very much would have a similar mindset around human nature and that we're made in the likeness of God. Although we don't have the same sense of original sin, not that there isn't sin in the world, uh, but that we're not carrying on uh, in the Catholic sense a spiritual taint. Uh, we do take seriously that concept in our lived lives, as I think about it, with systems in the world.
Hmm.
Recognize that our social structures are inherently sinful in bias toward whatever other doesn't work for what the system is set up for.
That brings a question to my mind, Reverend Jude, and this isn't the first time we've talked about the inherently sinful nature of social systems either. I wonder, does the sinful quality of social systems have something to say then about human nature? I wonder if the ways that we organize ourselves are built out of something that we really can't change about who we are.
That is a really interesting theological point. How do I wrestle that with that in a Unitarian Universalist context? How
Hold
does
on to it for a moment because
oh
the Catholics don't have a good track record. I want to hear your answer, but I also want to share that Catholic uh, doctrine uh, hasn't gotten this right in a humanistic way all the time. In fact, a lot of the religious trauma that we have in our world come from Catholic social systems. They were built into our way of living, and the clearest example comes through colonialism and colonial practice. I mentioned that I come from New Mexico, and part of the reason why English and Spanish our languages that are spoken in New Mexico comes from colonial heritage, Christian colonial heritage. And so I only say that as a caveat, thinking about what it means about human nature that our social systems are so flawed.
You have me rethinking my beliefs around original sin as we're talking right now. I That is fascinating. Our Unitarian Universalist theological sense of self and worth is often tied into a communal understanding of our human identity. And if our human identity is a social one, and I think a lot of anthropologists and humanists and sociologists would agree with that as a good given, then that original sin lives and breathes in how we interact in human ways that we don't necessarily have control over. And those are our social structures. Fascinating.
That's very interesting. And I love what you said about our identity as humans being communal. That location of that or definition of humankind, um, I think, is also something that we share. Unitarian Universalism sees the community as such an integral building block. And as Catholics, we talk about ourselves as the body of Christ. Um, Fairly ineffective if we're separated from the rest of the whole. One person can't do very much, but being connected, staying in relationship, and participating in, I guess the word we use is parish life, participating in the shared community is part of our nature. And it feels good because it's who we are. That's another point of connection. I love that.
It's a fascinating juxtaposition. Original sin is often the the thing that we were talking about before, either today or another day at church, about uh, what can instigate religious trauma, and we're especially in a Unitarian Universalist context, and really most congregational churches these days are bringing people in that have either never experienced church and have no issues at all, or have, and it's drama around the concept of original sin and the idea that sin, in that sense, that we can't get away from it, that's been so harsh on so many. It's freeing in a way to hold on to that idea that it's the systems that we benefit from and perpetuate that we can't get away from, or are harmed by, that we can't get away from. And that might be a key in my context, in the context that you're shared in, serving
Mm.
in bringing people back in that have been harmed by other applications of that theology.
Mm, that's a great point. Thank you, Reverend Jude. You know, I'm thinking about um, the religious trauma that comes from being told who you are is wrong or is bad or is fundamentally broken. Um, it's I think that the most damage, just based on my experience, comes from this concept of attainable perfection. That is, if you just do it right, you can overcome this original brokenness, this original damage. Uh, and it has caused so many people to internalize their own worthlessness and failures, to move on and to grow. Uh, I would even say another failure of our systems to serve people as individuals is we lift confession as a sacrament, as an opportunity to find absolution and forgiveness from the the weight of those feelings of inadequacy. Ultimately, that holds individuals accountable, not systems, not social gatherings, not institutions. Um, and that ultimately, I noticed where Catholic praxis gets its legs, so to speak, gets its feet for walking, come from care for the individual, care for the inherent worth and dignity of a person because of their nature, not from an indictment of a failed social system. And that's something that I hope is changing.
It's in a Unitarian Universalist world. Our mindset is often hyper focused on the system, and we tend to fail on the individual, ironically.
That's interesting. I have another question, um, and I'm curious about how individualism functions in Unitarian Universalism. Uh, to me, it connects to the nature of our role as people together. Uh, w-
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, our congregational original sin is liberalism, is individualism, is Protestantism. We protested our way out of the church in the UU side of things, and it is a nature of our community to hyperfixate on individualism.
yeah,
So
I
we,
don't say yes as in I agree. I'm saying yes as in I see that for us too. It's a shared struggle.
oh, maybe it's an American thing, or maybe this is why we have global warming. It's a human nature problem.
Wow.
That's original sin, doesn't it?
Here in the United States, as Americans, we do have a unique struggle. Catholics have a unique struggle as Americans trying to figure out how we are to engage with the individualism of our culture. I think that that has more to do with our location than human nature. What do you think?
Well, in the US, every part of the world has its own partisanship, though. So to
Mm,
say that it's location based, yes, in locations, the flavor, the tea
mhm,
is different, but it's everywhere. Partisanship,
yeah.
hardship, hellscapes. I mean, these stories
Mm,
in religion tell us universal stories
mm.
that are true in every locale.
Gosh, what a rich observation, Reverend Jude. That is our context. You're exactly right. It's everywhere. It's the wa in the water, so to speak. And these stories we tell, the stories we inherit from our institutions, from our nations, we have a tendency to adopt them unthinking. And as Catholics in particular, we're often accused of that uh, as being followers without conscience. Uh, but I think, Reverend Jude, what you're talking about right now is the importance for all of us, regardless of our faith tradition, regardless of our allegiance, communal allegiance, to be diligent and conscientious, and that our conscience is really essential in this time of crazy stories, misinformation coming from all sides.
And it goes back to those systems. Everything is flawed. Everything is flawed. No, we're in a what is the structural answer? Who has come up with a government or economy that has that solves everything, and it hasn't happened yet. I mean, I read about it in Star Trek, but we're a couple hundred years away from that fantasy utopia. And maybe that is the argument even more for whether it's a spiritual original sin or if it's a flaw in just our human nature when it comes to how we interact with one another.
Mm,
But it goes back to our something that's self. There's a self in this too. So
mm.
every self's inner struggle and reaction and interaction to the suffering and the struggles of the world, and those systems are the answer to it.
I love that. When we struggle against the magnitude of what isn't working in the world, I I am reminded as a Catholic that we follow Jesus, a specific person who left a legacy in stories and in words. And part of that legacy includes uh, the practice of love, that it is in loving as individuals and as communities that we can see through, I think, some of the heavy, depressing sadness and brokenness in our world and in ourselves. I think sometimes the solution to the brokenness within ourselves is in community. Sometimes the solution to the brokenness of our communities is in ourselves. Sometimes the solution to the brokenness of both is in shared effort and um, forgiveness, love in its many forms.
Hmm.
That is, I think, a behavior that is naturally human. That is something that I think is integral to human nature.
And we're in our Unitarian Universalist life, our faith community, our a larger denomination is reflecting theologically and what if love is at the center, and it looking at our shared values of justice, equity, transformation, plurality, interdependence, and generosity. And we have not yet finalized that wider theological reflection, but it's moving in that direction very strongly. That we have these values that are core to us, and at the center of them is love. And if that is not where our center is, then maybe our human nature is leaning back toward what you would call the original sin.
Mm, mm. What a remarkable and radical um, uh, assertion, I would say, to put love at the center of everything. I think we can all get behind that project.
And join us next time. Our session will be discussing justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Good to be with you.